Hello. And I'm just going to pull this so I won't be so teeny tiny. There. Well, we're on our last two chapters by the Great Horn Spoon. And we've been learning a lot from all the slides of how to apply this type of thinking to our independent reading. So let's get on. The 15th of August. So I guess they're going to go ahead and have that fight. Can you tell which one's praiseworthy? He looks a lot different than he did from the beginning. He's changed not only emotionally, but also physically. Let's get started. Jack very nearly jumped a foot. By the Great Horn Spoon, he yelled, "Look, I see it. Pay dirt!" And Praiseworthy exclaimed, Yeller as can be. The gold revealed itself like bits of sunlight trapped in the loosened earth. The two partners flung their hats in the air in sheer exuberance. They clasped arms and swung around and around an oblong pit. "We've got it, Jack! We've done it!" Praiseworthy roared. "We've struck it rich!" It was a moment before Jack, in his excitement, realized that Praiseworthy had called him Jack. Not Master Jack. Just Jack. Plain Jack. The way he'd always wanted it to be. He thought he'd never stop leaping for joy. But then he fished out a golden lump and beat it with a stone, flat as a button. "Cut some steaks, quick, Jack." Anything would do. Praiseworthy drew his tattered umbrella from their pack and pounded it on the ground. It made a fine corner post for the claim. Jack stripped a fallen pine limb with their clasped knife. Praiseworthy measured out 50 feet by strides, which would give them plenty of elbow room. Soon they had the boundary staked, and Jack ran from corner to corner, hanging tin cans in place. They had their claim, legal as could be. And Praiseworthy laughed. "Good eye, Higgins has done us a good turn," in spite of himself. After the first day's washings, Praiseworthy went to Coloma to buy a long tom, and Jack stayed behind with the squirrel gun to keep an eye on things. Within 24 hours, miners had staked claims everywhere around them. The place quickly got the name of Gravedigger's Hill. Praiseworthy and Jack worked from morning till night. They carried pay dirt bucket by bucket down the slope to the sluice box in the river. Now remember, we learned about that when we were doing nonfiction. The hole grew wider and longer. They filled a bucket skin pouch and tied it off at the top. Hour after hour, Praiseworthy swung the pick, and day after day, Jack emptied the bucket after bucket into the long tom. Their fortune grew heavier. "Won't Aunt Arabella be surprised when we walk in?" Jack grinned one night after supper. Praiseworthy was smoking one of his long 9 cigars. "Why, we'll be able to use socks of gold for doorstops." Praiseworthy gazed into the coffee fire, and his finger touched Miss Arabella's small portrait button in the pocket of his shirt. She was so far away, a continent away in Boston. He wondered what she was doing at that very moment, staring into the fireplace and thinking of him, perhaps. But that was nonsense, he told himself quickly, and turned from the fire. He must not forget his place. And not literally place where he's at, but his place of being a butler. Once back in Boston, he would take up his old duties again. He was, he reminded himself firmly, born and bred a butler, like his father before him, and his father before him. Miss Arabella would be lost without him. Why, Boston would never accept him as anything but what he was, a butler. Still, Boston was a long way off, and there was the sound of the river below to enjoy, and the cigar between his teeth to savor. One morning, a miner came rushing up the hill from Shirt Tail Camp. "Doc Higgins has escaped." "What's that?" said Praiseworthy, dropping his pick. "Yup. During the night, he used them forceps of his on the jailhouse we built. Pulled the nails through like he was yanking teeth, and got a board loose. Slipped right out. He's long gone by now, and good riddance." Praiseworthy wiped the sweat that had rolled down into his whiskers. "Maybe he has learned a lesson, but I doubt it. He's just running from one noose to another. There are plenty of hanging trees in the diggings, and he'll be standing under one sooner or later, with his feet off the ground." After almost 2 weeks of busting ground and shoveling dirt, their claim began to play itself out. The washings grew thinner and thinner. One by one, the other miners gave up on Gravediggers Hill. It had boomed, and now it was dying. So what that means, it boomed. Everything pretty much they've mined out. The boomers pulled their stakes to follow rumors of other gold strike. On the morning of the 15th of August, the day Praiseworthy was to face Mount Ox, in bare-fisted combat, the two struck their tent. Praiseworthy seemed in no hurry to keep his appointment in Hangtown. Jack wondered if Praiseworthy had changed his mind. "Not on your life, Jack. We'll make it." Jack blindfolded Stub, and they loaded up. Remember, that's the donkey. They had 11 heavy pouches of gold dust, worth a fortune in San Francisco. Providing we get it there," mused Praiseworthy. "Providing we get it there," mused Praiseworthy. "We might meet up with the road agents again." "Exactly. This squirrel glen of ours barely scares off squirrels. Jack, I think the time has come for shooting irons." Jack's heart took a leap. A four-shooter? "I think a four-shooter would be an excellent choice." They stood for a last moment gazing at their claim. The umbrella still rose from a corner with a tin can on top. Praiseworthy left it there. Gravediggers Hill had been good to them, and they walked away as if they were abandoning an old friend. Almost at once, several Chinese miners with pigtails dangling from their flat straw hats moved in to work over the diggings. Excuse me. "Good luck, boys." "Good luck, boys," Praiseworthy called. At Column, they traded in. Oh, my throat. I better get a drink. Let's see. Okay, I think I'm better now. Sorry. Okay. At Coloma, they traded in their pick and shovel, tent, and gold pans. They wouldn't be needing them anymore. They left the Coloma Colma on the stage, each with a revolver tucked in his belt. Jack rubbed his hands along the butt of the four-shooter. He felt invincible. He turned for a last look at Stubb. They had stolen him to the justice of the peace, and at that moment the official was sitting in the dust, his legs spread out before him. The burro stood looking very pleased with himself. Oops, I think I misread that. I better go back and check. They had sold, not stole. They had sold him to the justice of the peace. And at that moment, the official was sitting in the desk, his legs spread out before him. The burro stood looking very pleased with himself. Burro, donkey. So we know Stubbs' reputation of bucking people off, so he did it there again. I forgot to tell him Stubb thinks he's a mule, said Jack. Praiseworthy smiled. I'd say the justice of the peace just found out for himself. They reached Hangtown late in the afternoon. The main street was hung with buntings, as if it were the 4th of July. The place swarmed with miners, horses, mules, and burros. It looked to Jack as if every man and animal in the diggings had come to town. When Praiseworthy stepped out of the stagecoach, a shout went up. There he is! It's Bullwhip himself! Pitch and Pine Billy rushed over with his ears bent under the weight of his hat. It's about time, he spit. The boys was grumbling. Then you run out on the match. Not that they blame you. Howdy, Jack. Howdy, Pitch Pine Billy. In another moment, Jimmy from town had crowded around, and Buffalo John and Quartz Jackson. You'll have to excuse the missus, said Quartz Jackson. She don't want to watch. Let's get on with it, said Pitch Pine Billy. Where's the mountain ox? Eatin' oysters over at the Chinese Chow Chow, someone answered. He got hungry waiting around. Somebody fetch him, boys, spread out. The miners formed a large circle in the center of the street. Others climbed on the roofs of the store for a better view. When the mountain ox appeared at the doorway of the Chinese restaurant, Jack's heart dropped to his boots. The man from Grizzly Flats grinned. He had a neck like the stump of a tree. There was oyster juice in his beard. His chest looked as big around as a flour barrel. He is a large gent at that, said Praiseworthy, studying his opponent at a distance. He handed Jack his revolver, together with the buckskin pouch tucked under his belt and weighing down his pocket. I wish we'd never come back, Jack muttered. It's not a fair match. No, sir. You want me to back out? Jack stood. Jack took a breath and shook his head. You gave your word. You've got to stick by it. That's right. And anyway, I intend to lick him. Praiseworthy stripped off his shirt. The mountain ox across the way did the same. He was hairy as a grizzly bear and looked twice as broad. Jonas T. Fletcher, the Undertaker, stood in the clearing. You two gladiators ready? Praiseworthy nodded. The mountain ox wiped the juice from his beard. He grinned and turned to a Chinese in the crowd. Ah, Lee, go fry me up about 2 dozen more oysters. I'll be there in a minute, soon as I whip this bullwhip fella. "Come out fightin'," said the town undertaker. "If either one of you gets killed, I'll give him a free funeral job. May the best man survive." The undertaker scurried out of the clearing. Praiseworthy stepped forward, striking a pose with his arms. "Elbow in," he told himself. The mountain ox came out with his arms spread like the wings of a buzzard. The crowd stood tense. Squirts of chewing tobacco raised silent puffs of dust. Ooh, imagine that. They spit that brown tobacco, hits the ground, and then there's a little bit of dust. Ooey. Jack's heart was pounding in his ears. The gladiators closed the distance between them, and the pride of Grizzly Flats wasted no time. Armed with enough power to burst through a barn door. When it had run its course, the crowd was astonished to see Praiseworthy still standing. He had felt nothing more than the wind. He had ducked with the greatest of ease. The street brawler, with his wide-open stance, signaled his punch in advance. Immediately, Praiseworthy countered with a left jab. It didn't amount to much, but it surprised the mountain ox. Jack gazed towards the center of the clearing with a leap of hope. In the afternoon heat, Praiseworthy's back glistened with sweat. The new muscles along his arms and shoulders looked polished. Almost 2 months in the diggings, swinging a pick from morning till night, had their effect. He had the power to burst through a barn door himself. "Come on, Ox, finish him off. Don't be scared of him, Bullwhip." Again the mountain ox swung, and again Praiseworthy escaped with nothing more than a wind burn. He was getting the hang of it. He was vigilant. He concentrated. He knew that one misstep, one miscalculation, and the mountain ox would end the match with a single blow. 5 minutes passed. To Jack, it was 5 hours, 5 days. The mountain ox swung one haymaker after the other, but Praiseworthy dodged, ducked, and stepped aside. He cut a tall, lithe figure in the afternoon dust. Having by now made a thorough study of his opponent, as the box advised, Praiseworthy devised his attack. Left jab, he told himself. Keep them coming like bee stings. To the proboscis. Okay, you know how a bee has a proboscis? When you studied in 2nd grade, the life cycle of a butterfly? Same thing. Okay. The mountain ox may be all muscle, but a nose is a nose. So that's where he's going to aim. The crowd, in growing amazement, watched and chewed tobacco and squirted juice. Not only was Praiseworthy still on his feet, he hadn't been touched. The oysters in the Chinese chow chow burned to a crisp. Praiseworthy kept jabbing with his left, and the mountain ox's nose turned as red as a tomato. Once, when the gladiators had worked themselves to the very edge of the crowd, the mountain ox let fly a carefully aimed wallop. Just as carefully, Praiseworthy ducked, and the blow collided with Cheap John the auctioneer. He went flying backwards, knocking down 6 miners like so many dominoes. The bout continued without let-up, and the sun began to set through the pines. Praiseworthy had hardly exerted himself. He would duck, dispatch a left jab, and resume the stance he remembered so well from the Gentleman's Book of Boxing. But the mountain ox had been swinging his arms like a windmill, and now his tongue was nearly hanging out. His brawler's arms, once so wide, He now seemed to drag at his sides. But like a wounded animal, he was still dangerous. Still, it seemed praiseworthy the time had come to close the book. Big as was the pride of Grizzly Flats, he had a jaw like other men, and a jaw was a jaw. A final bee sting. The mountain ox shook his head and stuck out his jaw in fury. Praiseworthy stepped in with a right cross from the shoulder, exactly as the book had advised, and it felt to him as if he were hitting a barn door. Jack held his breath. The mountain ox was still on his feet 5 seconds later, but then he keeled over backwards like a statue and lay spread eagle in the dust. A roar burst from the crowd, and Pitchin' Pine Billy rushed in to hold up Praiseworthy's arm. "The winner! I don't know how he done it, but you saw it. The fair name of Hangtown has been saved. Boys, let's celebrate." Praiseworthy pulled on his shirt, and Jack handed him his revolver. He stuck it in his belt. The miners were raising noise all around them, but the two partners regarded each other, exchanging a silence. Finally, Praiseworthy said, "How was that, Jack? I backed up my reputation fair and square, didn't I? Jack's face glowed as if he swallowed a lantern. He was bursting with pride. There wasn't a man in the diggings he'd rather have for a partner. Not Pitchin' Pine Billy or Quartz Jackson or Jimmy from town or Buffalo John. It wasn't a fair match. No, sir, Jack grinned. The mountain axe can hardly read or write. Why, he doesn't know B from a bull's foot. Okay. So now, arrival at the Long Wharf. So, remember the Long Wharf in San Francisco? And it had planks, wooden planks. Remember I had the picture of that? Well, let's get on. It's the last chapter. This has been such a good book. The following morning, Praiseworthy and Jack climbed aboard the stage of the Sacramento City and were given a rousing send-off. Time was running out. Now that they had struck it rich, they had better hurry back to Boston before Aunt Arabella sold the house with all its family memories. But lately, Praiseworthy found himself thinking less and less about Boston and more of Miss Arabella. She would like California, he thought, and of course she ought to be finding herself a husband. A man would be lucky to have her at his side, if only he weren't a butler. But that was unthinkable. He quickly forced the thoughts out of his head. Jack was almost disappointed when they came down out of the mountain and arrived in Sacramento City without even a glimpse of a road agent. He had been ready at any moment to draw his four-shooter. The steamboat was waiting in the river. They bought tickets and went aboard with their heavy pouches of gold dust. Sacramento City drifted away behind them, and in 14 hours they would be in San Francisco. The captain, they learned, was trying to break his own speed record. 14 hours or less, he chuckled from the pilot house window. Gentlemen, hold on to your hats. The small stern wheeler went charging down the river, blasting its whistle at everything that got in its way, even floating logs. Cananac sailors kept pitching cord wood into the furnace, and on deck the passengers amused themselves watching the needle rise on the steam gauge. 45 pounds pressure and still rising, a miner from Poverty Hill chuckled. Why, we'll trim a full hour off the river record if we don't climb up on a sandbar first. Another passenger shook his head. It seems to me we could use a little less steam and a little more caution. Praiseworthy and Jack were weighted down with treasure. They carried their pouches of gold dust securely tied to their belts with their revolvers bristling in the sun. Praiseworthy lit a long nine cigar, and they sat behind the jack staff watching every bend in the river approach. Fine looking country, Praiseworthy would say from time to time. Fine looking country, Jack would agree. He sensed how much his partner hated to leave this rough, untamed territory. No one in Boston would think of referring to Praiseworthy as Bullwhip, and Aunt Arabella would put a stop to Jack's coffee drinking. But Boston was where they belonged. I'm not sure that Jack really thinks that. Remember how his first experience with the coffee? Now he just loves it. He couldn't do without it. They were not the only miners aboard who were heading for home. They met passengers who had abandoned the diggings in disgust, as poor as when they had arrived. Some standing for months in the chilly streams had picked up nothing at all. Still, others like Praiseworthy and Jack had struck it rich, and their belts and pockets were heavy with gold pouches. I don't know how safe that is. The two partners slept in everything but their boots. When they awoke the next morning and went out on deck, the stern wheel was entering the broad blue stretch of San Francisco Bay. The masts of hundreds of ships could be seen in the distance, clustered around the port. We might get ourselves passage home today, said Jack. Might, said Praiseworthy. Every day counts. We've got to reach Boston before Miss Arabella does anything foolish. The passengers were gathering around the steam gauge again, and somebody called out, 58 pounds pressure, and still rising. At that moment, with the long wharf less than a mile away, oh no, the boiler exploded with a roar, and the smokestack shot in the air like an arrow. The pilot house followed, with the captain still inside shouting orders. The explosion lit up the day and blew a hole in the bottom of the ship. Passengers were pitched over the side as if shot from slingshots. Praiseworthy and Jack were among them. Oh, I like how he uses the example of a slingshot. Passengers were pitched over the side as if from a slingshot. You know, those things that you put like a rock in and you go, bing! That's a slingshot. The next thing Jack knew, he was underwater, and the gold pouches, heavy as lead, were pulling him down. Oh my gosh, what do you think is going to happen? Have an idea? Shall I read on? Okay, I will. He fought to come up, but the weights kept dragging him below. Then, fighting for his life, he unbuckled his belt. Buckskin pouches and a 4-shooter fell away into the deep. Second later, he bobbed to the surface. He spit water and looked around. The riverboat was gone. So was Praiseworthy. But a moment later, his partner appeared. breaking surface about 10 feet away. Jack felt a quick throb of relief. He wiped the wet hair out of his eyes. Hang on, partner. Whoops. Hang on, my pot. Got the wrong voice. Hang on, partner, said Praiseworthy, shoving over a splintered plank of wood. Are you all right? Ruination, cried Jack. I unbuckled my belt. Praiseworthy's whiskers were running with seawater. Think nothing of it, Jack. I had to do the same thing. And he's still calm? He's always calm, that Praiseworthy. Within 10 minutes, there were several boats alongside, fishing passengers out of the bay. When Praiseworthy and Jack landed at the Long Wharf, they were not only as penniless as the day they had arrived, but soaking wet to boot. They had struck it rich, but their fortune was somewhere in the deep of the bay. Gone forever, Jack muttered softly, but Praiseworthy was undaunted. Mere bits of colored metal, he grinned. We have our good health, damp as it may be at the moment. The captain gave us a very expensive bath, you might say. They wouldn't be returning to Boston with their pockets full of gold nuggets, but return they must. Aunt Arabella would need them even more now than with everything at home sure to be lost. They had hardly climbed up the boat stairs to the wharf when Jack noticed the Lady Wilma still riding at anchor. Strange, said Praiseworthy. Captain Swain had planned to sail home as soon as he could unload. Maybe he'll let us work our passage back, said Jack. A first-rate idea, remarked Praiseworthy. Without delaying even to dry out, they borrowed a skiff and roared to the Lady William. Once alongside, they shipped their oars, and Praiseworthy raised his hands to his mouth. Hello, he called. There came no answer. There wasn't even a sound from the other ships at anchor nearby. It was as if they had rowed into a graveyard of sailing vessels. Finally, they climbed aboard and looked around. The crew's gone, said Praiseworthy. There's not a soul on deck. It's spooky, said Jack. Praiseworthy shouted up at the pilot house. Captain Swain! There was no reply except from a cat sunning himself on a rotting mound of canvas. Soon another cat appeared from the hatch, and when Jack looked up, he saw a cat walking along one of the yard arms. If you don't remember what a yard arm is, I have a picture of it. There's nothing here but cats, Jack said. Those cats from Peru. And they appear to have multiplied, Praiseworthy nodded. They went searching through the ship, and everywhere they looked were Peruvian cats and kittens. When they peered into the hold, they saw the cargo still there waiting to be unloaded. Rats had gnawed into barrels of smoked fish, and the cats had fattened themselves on rats and fish. What has happened here? Praiseworthy mused. It looks like Captain Swain has simply abandoned his ship. He scratched through his whiskers. Left it to all these cats? A yellow kitten was winding itself around Jack's leg, and he picked it up. This morning they had pockets full of gold dust and nuggets. Now they couldn't pay their fare home. He wondered how they would ever get back to Aunt Arabella and Constance and Sarah. Strange, said Praiseworthy again. They returned to the skiff, and Jack put the kitten in his shirt. He tied up they tied up at the Long Wharf and walked into town and tried to find Captain Swing. Instead, they found Mr. Azar Jones, the Yankee trader. He was standing outside an auction tent beside a barrel of free pickles. "Confound it," he said with a hearty laugh. "I recognize the boy. But is that you behind the whiskers and the red miner's shirt?" "It's me," said Praiseworthy. "Help yourself to the pickles. I've become an auctioneer. You have you have bad luck in the diggings?" "You might say so," said Praiseworthy. "Help yourself to the pickles. You look hungry." "Thank you, sir," said Jack. "I am." What happened to Captain Swing and the Lady Wilma?" said Praiseworthy. "The same thing that happens to almost every other ship that comes in here with the gold fever. His crew ran off to the diggings. Why, there are more than 200 ships out there rotting at anchor, deserted. Captain Swing couldn't even hire enough men to unload his cargo. Finally, he just gave up in disgust and got himself a passage home. Have a pickle." "Is Dr. Buckbee still in San Francisco?" asked Praiseworthy. He tried a pickle. Not him. He got over the fever and gave up that gold map of his. I heard he was horse doctoring somewhere up the river. Doing fine, too. Me, I'll be doing fine if the rats don't put me out of the Cheap John business. Town's full of 'em. Why, a man can hardly stand still at night without something beginning to gnaw on his feet. Blame it, I just got hold of some flour from Chile, and the rats are stealing me blind." "Rats?" said Praiseworthy. "Did you say rats?" remarked Jack. Mr. Azara Jones nodded. I auctioned off a cat yesterday for $15. "Cats?" said Praiseworthy. "Did you say cats?" remarked Jack, pulling the kitten from his shirt. What plan? I think something's gonna happen. What do you think?" Mr. Azar Jones clutched the kitten as if it were a nugget of gold. Praiseworthy gave Jack a wink and looked at Mr. Azar Jones squarely in the eye. "Why, I can safely say that Jack and I can supply you with unlimited supply of ratting cats. Just provide us with a couple of bags and we'll be back." The cat auction drew such a crowd that the street was almost blocked. Every storekeeper needed a ratter, and the bidding was spirited. Midway through the auction, the signal on the telegraph hill announced the arrival of a sailing vessel, but hardly a soul left the auction. By late afternoon, Praiseworthy and Jack had a clink of gold pieces in their pocket. Their share of the cat money ran to almost $400. And remember, that was a lot more money than it is today. Boy, poor, rich, poor, rich. They wandered toward the Long Wharf to see about passage home. The sail vessel had dropped an anchor, and now passengers were coming ashore. Suddenly, Jack stopped. He saw a young girl in a dark traveling dress that reminded him of his sister Sarah. Beside her was a tall girl who reminded him of his sister Constance. Beside them was a woman in a straw hat and green eyes who looked exactly like Aunt Arabella. It was Aunt Arabella! Jack could barely believe his eyes, and he realized that even Praiseworthy had stopped in his track. but the woman and the two girls passed them by as if they were total strangers. Ooh, well, remember, they look different now. They must look really different. Sarah, Jack cried out. The smallest girl turned. Constance, Jack exclaimed. The other girl turned around. Miss Arabella. I said it wrong voice. Sorry, I should have it down by now. Miss Arabella, said Praiseworthy. The woman turned, and then, suddenly, despite the disguise of jack boots, the rough red miner shirts, and the slouched hats, she recognized her nephew and the butler who had left Boston so many months before. Jack! Jack! Dear! cried Aunt Arabella. There was a shout of joy, and they rushed back towards each other. Jack was engulfed in arms. Praiseworthy stood at a slight distance behind, and then, wiping an eye with her handkerchief, Aunt Arabella straightened and smiled and said, Hello, Praiseworthy. Hello, Miss Arabella. You're so changed, both of you. Yes, miss. I'm delighted to see you, Praiseworthy. I'm astonished to see you, Miss Arabella, and Miss Constance, and Miss Sarah. Suddenly they were all talking at once. We sold the old house, said Constance. Soon as we could, said Sarah. It was so big and so full of musty old memories, Aunt Arabella said, smiling now. When we discovered Jack's notes on the tea service that the two of you were running away to California, the girls and I couldn't wait to follow. It was time to rid ourselves of that house of the past. It's like being free of a curse. Let me look at you. Did you find gold? Sarah blurted out. Plenty of it, Jack said proudly, and I drink coffee now. Coffee? Exclaimed Constance. They call me Jamocha Jack in the diggings. How dreadful, Aunt Arabella laughed. She turned back to Praiseworthy, regarding him with a green-eyed twinkle. And what do they call you? Bullwhip. Bullwhip, miss. How fearful. What has happened to your black hat and coat and umbrella? Gone? If clothes make the man, as they say, Miss Arabella, I suppose I'm a miner now. Perhaps it's time I shed my past myself. You make a very striking miner, it seems to me, Aunt Arabella smiled. Oh, out here, one man is as good as another. Only more so, said Jack. Aunt Arabella stood very straight. I've always believed it. Will you be returning to Boston? Asked Praiseworthy. Certainly not. That changed everything, and Praiseworthy crimped an eye just like Pigeon Pine Billy. Then he scratched through his whiskers. In that case, he stopped to gather up his courage. I mean, yes, said Aunt Arabella. If I'm no longer a butler, what am I trying to say is, well, in California, we say a thing straight out. And Arabella smiled. Then do stop beating around the bush, Praiseworthy. You see, yes, I mean, women are scarce out here, Miss Arabella. Before you can walk a block, you're going to have 10 proposals of marriage. How delightful. What I mean to say is, yes. He cleared his throat. Maybe this, he cleared his throat. He cleared his throat. Maybe this isn't the time or place, Miss Arabella, But when a man strikes gold, he doesn't lose any time staking a claim. When with sudden decision, Praiseworthy whipped off his hat. His mouth was as dry as a cured salmon, but he kept talking. If there's going to be any proposal of marriage, I intend to be the first in line. I've got no verse to speak of, although I have taken to smoking strong cigars. To say it right out, Miss Arabella, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Constance and Sarah began jumping up and down on their toes. Oh, do, Aunt Arabella! We know you gave him your picture a long time ago. He carries it in his shirt pocket, Jack exclaimed. Aunt Arabella was smiling through a wet sparkle in her eyes. Marry you? Why, of course. I thought you'd never ask. By the great horn spoon, Praiseworthy gasped. Jack had never seen him so flustered. He stared. Constance stared. Sarah stared. Suddenly, Praiseworthy gave the three of them a grin. Youngsters, if you don't stop staring, I'll take a hairbrush to you. Jack was delighted to hear it. He went on gapping, and so did Constance, and so did Sarah. Aunt Arabella held her straw hat against a gust of wind. Then we'll be going back to the gold fields with you, won't we? Oh, it's no place for women and children, said Praiseworthy. We'll make it a place for women and children. We could build a cabin, said Jack, like Quartz Jackson. So remember when we were studying about the gold rush, that there weren't hardly any women and children there. So that's another fact that we already learned about during the real gold rush. Perhaps we could, at that, Praiseworthy said, on some hill within sound of the river, he thought. Why, he might even bring along a law book. He could read it at night. The diggings could use some book law, and a man had to think of making a future. So remember, the goldfields, there was no laws. It was a very rough, unlawful place. So Praiseworthy already is coming up with an idea to have a job. Praiseworthy put Aunt Arabella's hand in the crook of his arm, and they started walking up the long wharf. They looked very much like a family. They felt like a family. They were a family. The end. Well, I'm glad it was a happy ending. We know it kind of sounded there like it could end differently. And we know that not every story has a happy ending. Well, I really enjoyed reading that book, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it. So I want you to wash those hands, listen to your parents, and stay safe. Bye.